If your innovation is customer-led as opposed to competitor-led, customers' money is more important and better than the investor's money.
Welcome to Prime Venture Partners Podcast, a podcast for entrepreneurs looking to build and grow their startups. Learn about uncommon strategies and common traps from makers and doers of startup ecosystem.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Prime Venture Partners Podcast. Today it is an honor and privilege to have with us Sanjeev Bikhchandani, founder and vice chairman of InfoEdge Group, the parent company for Naukri.com. Sanjeev, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me, Amit. Thank you so much.
So Sanjeev, let's get on with it. I think the way you guys started Naukri, and one of the things that still sticks with me even after all these years, is how little capital you had raised back in the day, right? It was about 7 crores, which at that time was $1.7 million, even lesser now. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the starting of Naukri and the capital efficiency that you were thinking about as you built that business. Of course, things have changed since with respect to other companies and the internet ecosystem.
Yeah, so look, I quit my job in 1990, and for the first 7 years, we drifted into a whole lot of small things, many different things, teaching, training, reports, databases, salary surveys, and so on. Whatever came our way to survive, and we were bootstrapping, right? And in 97, we launched Naukri as one more small idea, or seemingly small idea, among a string of small things we'd done. We just simply took jobs from newspapers around the country and put them in our own words on the website and launched it. We had no money. There was no venture capital in those days, or very little. I had never heard of it. I had never actually met a venture capitalist. So really, you had to, sort of live on customer money. So you had to sell to survive and break even, right? And that's how we started. And I think those 10 years of bootstrapping, of which the last 3 years Naukri was bootstrapping, I think that taught us a lot. So capital efficiency was built into our DNA simply because we didn't have a choice. We had to make do with less, and we had to get customer money to survive. And that got sort of imprinted in our DNA. And when we raised money, which at that time we thought was a lot of money, in hindsight, of course, it's very little money compared to what startups get today. We figured that we had to do it all in 7.29 crores, which is what we had raised from ICICI Venture in April 2000. And we got lucky. Shortly after we raised money, or we signed the agreement, maybe within 2 weeks, the market melted down, the dot-com bubble burst. And quite honestly, we didn't have time to spend the money foolishly. We simply put it in fixed deposit in the bank and said, okay, what do we do from here? We tore up the business plan on which we raised the money and said, rethink, reboot. What do we do from here? And this is the only money we'll ever get. We knew that. And we've got to break even on this, grow the company on this, and this is it. So when you don't have a choice and you don't have options, you do it the way you got to do it.
Very interesting that we're sitting here in this COVID time frame, and a lot of entrepreneurs who are probably listening to this podcast are also in the situation where either they don't have enough money or maybe they have lesser money than they anticipated. But yet I'm seeing that this is actually leading to some positive behavior in terms of unit economics, in terms of capital efficiency, in terms of managing it. So clearly here you're hearing it from one of the legendary entrepreneurs that necessity is the mother of invention, right? So you have to figure it out. Now, on the flip side, Sanjeev, a lot of companies have raised lots of monies, right? And I remember you vividly as one of the active board members on Make My Trip from the early days, as well as Zomato, where you're an investor and a board member. So can you talk about the new kind of world companies, perhaps, right, that are also doing well, but with a different path?
So look, times have changed. That was the year 2000. This is 2020. This is 20 years later. Clearly, in the intervening period, especially last 10 years, access to capital has multiplied manifold. Equally importantly, competition has increased, and even competition has access to capital. So even if you want to do it with less money, chances are your competition will raise more money than you and then force you to spend that kind of money. But having said that, my recommendation would still be, while you should raise money, you should spend it carefully and spend money as if it's the last money you'll ever have. And focus a lot on innovation, customer satisfaction, building IP, building a network effect, so that you can't be beaten by money. So if capital is your competitor's only strategy and you've built a good network effect to defend your business, I think you're in a good position. But right now, in the midst of this COVID crisis, I would say, number one, first assess your situation, which is what's your runway? How much money do you have? Now, if you're fortunate in having just raised the money and haven't yet built up high cost structures, you're very lucky, you can pivot very fast. On the other hand, if you've built this large workforce, high cost structures, it's painful to sort of sack people. It is painful to scale down. It's painful to pivot. If you are in that sort of situation, then you have a harder task. But either way, I would say conserve cash and focus on revenue, focus on cash flow, focus on the customer.
So Sanjeev, one of the things I remember vividly, I've heard you speak at some event many years ago, saying one of the critical things in a consumer business in particular is, organic demand. And you've often cited both Naukri and Zomato as two of the maybe 15 or 20 businesses that you've been involved in over the years, either as an investor or mentor or as an entrepreneur, that have this notion of organic demand. So does organic demand just sort of go through the roof when people are just raising money and burning money on marketing, discounting, etc.? How do you get that early sort of assessment of real demand in this era?
So, look, if you are solving an unsolved problem, if you are first mover and solving an unsolved problem, chances are you won't have to sell, the customer will buy, right? It happened in Naukri. And, you get an idea of unsolved problems from just observing customers, talking to them, what we call deep customer insight. So I got the idea of Naukri way back in 1989-90 when I was in my last job in a company that is now called GlaxoSmithKline, and then it was called HMM. I was in the marketing department and I was working on a brand called Horlicks. And there was an open hall where the marketing team would sit, maybe 8, 10 people, 12 people, all of whom were highly qualified from the IIMs and who were in marketing job in a multinational corporation, FMCG. So this is 89-90, this is pre-liberalization. Delhi had just two companies, two MNCs, which were in consumer marketing. And so if you wanted Delhi, you wanted an MNC, you wanted consumer marketing, and you wanted marketing, not sales, you were probably in the best job you could be in. And yet I noticed that when the office copy of Business India would come in, everybody would read it from the back, right? And because there were 35 to 40 pages of appointment ads in the back of Business India in those days, it was the number one appointment ad medium for professional managers. Now, I found it strange behavior because I said, look, I thought people bought magazines to read the articles, but here are the guys just reading the ads and they're discussing the ads and talking about jobs all the time. And they're in the best job they can be. So it's not as if they're looking. And that's when I realized that, look, jobs are a high interest category of information. And 7 years later, that insight came back to me when I saw the internet for the first time. And when we launched Naukri, saying that, listen, jobs are a high interest category of information. Let's just aggregate jobs from all published sources and put them out and see what happens. And sure enough, traffic came without us having to advertise. We had no money to advertise anyway. But traffic came, people began to apply from Naukri, then recruiters got to know about us. They began to put their jobs on Naukri directly. And that's how the virtuous circle was built up. Likewise, it was based on a customer insight. Likewise, one of the first questions I asked Deepinder Goyal of Zomato when I first met him, where did you get this idea from? Ye idea kahan se aaya? Basically, at that stage, Zomato was called Foodie Bay and it was a restaurant listing site. But they had all the menu cards. They were the only one of the menu cards, right? And because of which I would visit them, my son would visit them, Hitesh would visit them, and we would discuss, right? And that's when we got the idea, why don't we look at Zomato or Foodie Bay for investment? So that's when I reached out to Deepinder Goyal. I didn't know him from before. Just sent him a cold email. He came and met me. And I said, where did you get the idea from? And he said, look, I was working in Bain Consulting in Gurgaon. And it was an office where there were a large number of young people working, mostly male, many of them single. They would work late nights. There was an office cafeteria that did not serve lunch, but you could get your own food. And to make life easy, the admin team had put in one file folder all the takeaway menu cards of all the restaurants that would deliver there. And Deepinder said there would be a long line at 1 p.m. in order to access that file folder in the cafeteria. And I used to get impatient. So I came one Saturday and I scanned all the menu cards and put them up on my office, my personal page on the office intranet. And within 2 days, the IT infra guy came to me and said, hey, what have you done? Why is all the internal traffic going to your page? And he said, that's when the penny dropped. And I realized that aggregation of menu cards has got value. And so on weekends, he went out and he aggregated menu cards of all, but maybe 800 restaurants all over Delhi, NCR. And he launched the site Foodie Bay and it immediately began to get traffic because people valued menu cards. So it was based on that insight that if you aggregate menu cards, you will get traffic, that Foodie Bay, which is now called Zomato, was launched. So really, if you want what we call natural traction, that you're getting traffic without advertising, you're getting repeated traffic, you're getting positive word of mouth, it's going viral, you've got to be solving an unsolved problem or hitting a hot button. If you hit a hot button, half your success is ensured. You don't have to spend money to get traffic. And that's a big one. So I would say look for customer insight, talk to customers, meet customers, observe customers. Maybe you're a customer yourself. Maybe it's your own pain point you're solving. But either way, you have to have customer insight. So I would say customer insight is key.
Absolutely. Let's build on that. You said several things there, Sanjeev, right? So one is deep customer insights, and there's the original one. And then as you build the company, right, whether it is a Naukri or a Zomato or what have you. And in particular, you talked about a couple of things, right? One is more on the innovation side and building moats and continue to solve interesting customer problems. And the second is managing your cost structure. So can you talk about customer insight on an ongoing basis, right? There's the initial spurt and initial organic demand.
So look, the original idea of Naukri was simple in 97. Take jobs from newspapers from around the country, rehash them in your own words and put them up, and you get traffic. Once traffic came, people began to apply. Once people began to apply from Naukri, recruiters began to hear about us and began to contact us directly and say, hey, I've not advertised, but can you take these jobs and put them up? And that's when you began to charge. And that's how we got a revenue model. Now, all this is fine. So in the beginning, you had a couple of good ideas, you did them. You did a reasonable job of executing them. I wouldn't say outstanding, but reasonable. And you hit a hot button. But over time, you've got to keep on listening to the customer. So when we raised venture capital in the year 2000, we said, hey, why not add a field sales force and go out and meet clients? We were earlier selling by direct mail. And so we began to hire field salespeople. And, within a year or so, we had over 100. Within 2 years, we had over 200 across 9 or 11 offices around the country. And what we did at that time was that we started a Yahoo group of all the salespeople and the tech people and the product people and the senior management. And we told the salespeople, whatever the customer tells you, you please put it out on this group. So we had 200 sales guys, each posting messages. I met this customer. He's happy with the product, but he's saying, why don't you add this feature? What about this? This it's not solving this problem. So we were getting continuous feedback from clients, from customers, from the salespeople, saying this is what happened today, right? And that gave us a repository of ideas. And if the same idea was coming from 8, 10, 12 different people consistently, we would go out and execute it. And therefore, essentially, customers are telling us what to do and what they wanted, and we just did it. Okay, and that's how the product improved all the time. And so a lot of the subsequent innovations that we did, was simply customer feedback. And almost live customer feedback, same day feedback, next day feedback from salespeople on this Yahoo group, saying it's a simple idea, but it really gave us a lot of new ideas on how to on product improvement, which we executed well.
That is a wonderful hack. I think we're going to try and recommend every entrepreneur try that, saying crowdsource customer feedback on a real-time basis and use that. How about building moats and defensibility into your business, right? Because things keep changing all the time in tech.
So look, if you have a good network effect going for you, it's going to be hard to dislodge you as an incumbent. And what is our network effect? We've got the most jobs, therefore we get the most traffic. I think this is crucial. This is where the customer insight comes in, that people want to know about jobs. So make sure you get the most jobs. Now, getting the most jobs means it impacts a lot of your strategies. For example, it impacts your pricing strategy. So to get the most jobs, first we were taking jobs free from newspapers. Then when we began to charge, in addition to that, we said we priced it really low, 350 rupees a single job listing, or 6,000 rupees annual subscription, unlimited number of jobs in the year. Because our goal was to get the most jobs, because that's what would get us traffic. We knew about that. And if we didn't have that customer insight, we would not have adopted that pricing strategy. So we've got the most jobs, therefore we get the most traffic. We get the most traffic, therefore we get the most response. We get the most response, therefore we get the most clients. We get the most clients, therefore we get the most jobs. And it's a virtuous circle that snowballs in our favor. Now competition came in, right? But they didn't have this insight. So they priced their listing 10x of ours. And they simply wouldn't get enough jobs. Now, if you wouldn't get enough jobs, you had to advertise a lot to get traffic, and then you wouldn't get repeat traffic because you didn't have enough jobs. So without this insight informing our strategy, we would not have been able to build this virtuous circle, this network effect. And once we had this network effect, the truth is in media markets and, job listings, jobs classifieds is a media market. In media markets, it's well known that it's a winner-take-all market, and the number one will get 70% of the revenue, the number two will get 25%, and the 3, 4, and 5 will fight for 5%. But when it comes to profit in the industry, number one, who's got 70% revenue, will get about 120, 130% of profits. Nobody else will make money. Now, if you're making money, you can reinvest that money into sales teams, into servers, technology, new product, innovation, advertising, customer service, all those things, which will only go to strengthen your virtual circle. Now, if you're not making a profit, you can still do it as investor money, right? But we didn't have that luxury. We had only 7 crore rupees, 7.3 crore rupees, and we had a meltdown in our hands, and we did it with the money we had.
Wonderful. You also did one very unique thing, I think, which is that looking at basically international competition, right? A lot of times people say, hey, the Google of India is going to be Google, or the Facebook of India is going to be Facebook. You guys had Monster, you guys had LinkedIn later, you had so many other international. In theory, it's a online digital marketplace, right? And you could have done it. So I'm sure customer insight was one, but as you guide and mentor, the newer set of entrepreneurs who have global competition, right? Whether us, building SaaS companies globally or vice versa, right? Doing digital things that international competitors can come in. How do you think about international competition, and what would you guide some of the younger entrepreneurs in that area?
So look, if you've got a good solid network effect going for you, if you build good IP, if you've got stuff that can defend your business, then chances are no amount of money can displace you. Okay, that is the first learning that we had. There were times when we got really apprehensive that we will be beaten by competition by deeper pockets. But because we had this network effect going in our favor, we were not. And in hindsight, I think that's what kept us ahead. So focus on innovation. Now, innovation has to be informed by customer insight, which means you're always talking to customers and listening to them. Now, second is that if your innovation is customer-led as opposed to competitor-led, then hopefully you'll produce something which your customer will actually want. So keep one eye on your competition, certainly. Yes, are you missing a trick? But 80% of your focus should be on customers and what they are saying, what signals they're giving you, and what they're asking for. Because that innovation will satisfy the customer better, and he will stay with you, even if it means a higher price, even if it means you got lower ad budgets, even if it means your salespeople are paid 30% less than competition. It will not matter. Just produce a better product, and better product is what the customer wants. And that's how you define a better product.
I absolutely love this. Make your innovation be customer-led and not competition-led, right? Sort of keep an eye on the competition, but really, 2 eyes on the customer. Let me ask a slightly controversial question here, which is on, what do you think about feet on street distribution in like this age, right? Versus digital distribution, right? Thanks to all the mobile, internet, WhatsApp, whatever.
So look, it varies from market to market and customer to customer, right? Now, if you take a business like Naukri, your clients, the people who pay you money, right, are recruitment managers, HR managers, HR departments, corporations. Now, even now, you will not find too many HR managers or recruitment managers who have a corporate credit card. So if your solutions are going to be priced at, 50,000 rupees, 1 lakh rupees, 5 lakh rupees, 10 lakh rupees or more, right, it's very rare to find an HR guy who's going to put it on his personal credit card and then claim a reimbursement. Now, what this means is that the customer behavior is that he will demand a proposal, he will demand a couple of meetings, he will understand on the products, he will demand a proposal, he will negotiate price, he will ask for some add-ons here, some minusing there, and then he will pay by check or bank transfer, but usually check, even now. And to do that, you need a sales force. There is no getting away from that in India. This is India, and this is the reality. Right? Now, we try to sell in the US. When we first began to sell in the US, we put 2 people there. Nobody wanted to meet them. Because the US is a different market. They said, listen, just we talk on the phone and I'll pay online. So that's a different corporate culture. India is a different corporate culture. You've got to understand the local customer culture and understand the customer. And so India, I think for a while, at least, will stay a feet on street kind of market. So today we've got a 3-tiered sales force. We've got a key account sales force, which is above a certain value, fewer clients per salesperson, different kind of selling. We've got a named account selling, which is the next level. It's the next size clients. And then we've got retail clients, which are smaller clients, which is below a certain sum of money per annum. It is sold to by a telesales force. And beyond that, territories are geographical on the key account side and named account side. But you do need, in our business, we believe that it will be there for a while, you do need a field sales force. The other thing is that, look, you can, if a client has a recruitment budget of say 10 or 20 crore rupees, and left to himself, he's buying online, he might buy something for 50,000 rupees. You have the option to go and face-to-face upsell him to maybe 50 lakh rupees. And why would he give that up? So I think there's value in the field sales force. Is one of our many moats. It's a barrier to entry for competition. And clients seem to want it. They want the product explained to them. They want training. They want the replacement guy, the new recruitment trainee who's joined, he wants to be trained. They want that kind of servicing. So again, it's a market demand.
Great. So, Sanjeev, a lot of things have changed because of COVID, right? Like you said, you have a multi-tiered sales force. There may be more digital distribution, and feet on street is not going away. What do you think is going to remain unchanged? I'm looking across a large spectrum of businesses that you get to and the various entrepreneurs you deal with. What will remain unchanged?
So it depends. It depends how long this COVID thing lasts. Now, if a vaccine is out by September and it's universalized, it's one thing. If it takes 3 years, it's another thing. If a cure is found within 2-3 months, it's one thing. If the epidemic subsides, for whatever reason, whether it's Indian heat, Indian immunity, Indian spices, God, in diet, I do not know what. So it depends on when COVID recedes and how long it's there for, will determine what changes and how long-lasting the changes will be. So as of now, I would say fundamental human nature has not changed. You look at China, it's opened back. People are saying the pandemic is receded and it's business as usual. If there is early opening up and early control of the pandemic and a solution in sight, I would say not a lot will change, except businesses that have been hurt badly because of a 3-4 month lockdown may find it harder to recover. So there will be a slowdown, there will be a recession, but habits may not change. But if it's the pandemic stays for 2 years or 3 years, then a lot of things will change. And right now it's hard to imagine all that will change, because if you can't meet people face to face. So take a look at, people are talking about work from home. I think work from home is great. But look, how do you induct a new employee working from home? How do you onboard trainees working from home? How do you build company culture working from home? What's your company culture like? Well, we don't have a culture actually. We all work from home. We don't meet up. That's not how organizations are going to run. Okay, so physical workspaces, I believe, will come back. I believe companies will be more open to work from home, which means that you will work from home maybe 1 or 2 days a week sometimes, but you will still meet people. Fundamental, human beings are social animals. You want to meet people. You will. How do you brainstorm on Zoom? I don't know. How do you faff and have a cup of coffee and just go and park in somebody's cabin and say, "Kya chal raha hai bata?" On Zoom? You can't do that. So those things, people will want them back. So I suspect less will change than people think. Right now, of course, we're in the middle of COVID, and so people are saying everything has changed. I'm willing to bet a whole lot of things will not change.
Absolutely. I think fundamental human nature is not going to change. Like you correctly said, we are social beings. The behavior and the mannerism might change a little bit. Sanjeev, what if you were to give advice to yourself, like, 10 years or 15 years ago? What would you do differently? And likewise, if you see a young entrepreneur starting out today, like you were in 97, 98, what sort of advice would you give them?
So one of the big mistakes that we made in hindsight was that there was no tech person sitting at the top table in our company, okay, when we started out. So in 97, we didn't have a full-time tech head. We had a part-time person who we gave equity, close friend of mine. He was on the board of the company, and he would work from his house while doing other work. And that, we managed with that. And we did not realize to what extent we were underinvested in tech till about 2002, 2003, maybe 5 years after we launched. So I would say that we were great at sales and marketing and communication. We understood data very well. We understood the customer very well. We should have been better at tech and more invested in tech 20 years ago, maybe 23 years ago when we launched. The advice I'd give to young people today, starting out, is that I see a lot of people who are good at product and tech. But for them, sales, especially face-to-face sales, field sales, B2B sales, or even telesales, is a bit of a black box. See, somebody else has got to do it. It's not really my area of interest. And so very often sales is not at the top table, the way tech was not at the top table when we started Naukri. I would say you need a combination of all skills. You need product, you need tech, definitely. That's really important. You are a tech company in all likelihood. But you also, equally importantly, needs the ability to generate revenue and generate revenue at a price that's above what it costs you to generate that revenue, above cost of goods. And especially if capital is going to be in short supply in the post-COVID era, you've got to do it on customer money. What I tell young people whom I meet today, who are starting out as entrepreneurs, I emphasize that the customer's money is more important and better than the investor's money. Reason being, if you're getting the customer's money and you're getting it repeatedly from the same customer and you're getting it at a price that's higher than your cost, then chances are you have a viable business. And if you're getting the customer's money, the investor's money will almost certainly come, because investors love businesses that are getting customer money. On the other hand, if you get investor money without getting customer money, you have no idea if you have a viable business. You have got a good PowerPoint and you are able to persuade a couple of young investors across the table who never actually probably run a business themselves, to give you money. but you don't have the customer's vote yet. And that's a problem. So focus on the customer, get the customer's money, the investor's money will come. The customer's money is more important than the investor's money.
That is a fantastic note. As we wrap up here, Sanjeev, you accomplished so much, right? And I know you're very, very friendly to entrepreneurs and you help them a lot. So what drives and motivates you now, right? I know you're a co-founder at Ashoka University, one of the trustees there. You do a lot with TiE. Just a little bit about Sanjeev, the person, like what motivates you and excites you at this point in life? Maybe a little.
I love new ideas. I love listening to youngsters with their ideas. I love, they remind me of myself at their age. It fires on the creative side of my brain, my creative juices. And I love experimenting with new ideas. So, I can't do it myself because I'm doing what I'm doing. But if I can help and support people who are doing something good, smart people doing something good, committed people, hardworking people, I'm happy to do it.
Wonderful, Sanjeev. It has been just fantastic. Lots of interesting insights. Thank you again for sharing your precious time during this downtime. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Dear listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app for free, and you'll be the first one to know when new episodes are available. Just search for Prime Venture Partners Podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Castbox, or however you get your podcasts. Then hit subscribe. And if you have enjoyed the show, we would be really grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. To read the full transcript, find the link in the show notes.